Hi everyone, my name is Mike Clever and I am a programmer who created an online application based on an old board game called The Propaganda Game. I want to talk a little bit about why I got involved in this project and why the propaganda game is so important, especially in this day and age. The original board game of Propaganda was created by Lorne Greene, the actor who played Ben Cartwright on the old Western series Bonanza and Commander Adama in the original sci-fi TV series Battlestar Galactica. Lorne and a friend, Bob Allen, who is the uncle of my current employer Buzz Allen, assembled a game containing 55 different propaganda techniques and 300 examples for players to vote on which technique is being used in each example. Players can then challenge the majority opinion and engage in dialogue with each example. Once a year, an organization known as the Academic Gaming League of America holds a national tournament where the brightest kids of all ages compete for top honors playing various educational games such as the propaganda game. However, the tournaments do not use the original 300 propaganda examples found in the board game. The tournament uses examples that teachers, coaches, and instructors create ahead of time. The reason for this is because there are only 300 examples in the original board game, not to mention that those examples are over 50 years old. It's also important to point out that the examples needed to be appropriate for middle and high school kids. I was fascinated when I heard that there was a process that occurred before each tournament where a group of people went looking for propaganda examples, regardless as to whether they were purposely modeled examples. For me, it begged the question, why not let the kids create their own examples as well? I spoke to a few instructors at Algoa and asked them about the process of determining which examples were to be used for a tournament. The answer I received excited me even more. I was told, we have get-togethers where the coaches offer examples and then we discuss which ones are the best ones. The whole process is fun and very enlightening. I left the tournament 2 years ago thinking, why not capture that process? Why not create a way for everyone to find examples of propaganda that occurs in their lives and store them in a database? Further, why not create a game in which players can vote on which techniques they believe are being used in those examples? And why not create a selection process for players to see which kinds of propaganda examples they want? Let's say a person is affected by bullying in their lives. That person can come to our site, get signed up, play the propaganda single-player game, and choose to see propaganda examples that have to do specifically with bullying. What this game has to offer for this particular person is by seeing how bullies get away with what they get away with, they then know what to look for and how to avoid it, or how to call them out for what they are and make a stand. Peer pressure is another example the game covers. There is an example on the home page of propagandagame.org of a girl who is handing someone a pack of cigarettes. The caption reads, "What? Are you a chicken? You're one of those do-gooders, huh?" We learn in the propaganda game that this is an appeal to ridicule, where an attempt is made to influence us to accept a certain proposition by poking fun at those who oppose the proposition. This technique occurs every day in the schoolyards, in the workplace, and in the political arenas. I began to see that the 55 techniques the propaganda teaches happens constantly, many times without us knowing it. Each of the 55 techniques belongs to 6 different sections in the game. These sections are ways in which manipulation occurs. The first section is called self-deception, and in it we find techniques that are ways we internalize propaganda methods and arguments to convince ourselves of positions or beliefs that may be faulty. Again, there is an example on the propagandagame.org website that I believe exemplifies this perfectly. It is an image of an older woman talking to her daughter. The daughter says, "Mom, I'd really like you to get out more. You have so much to offer the world." The mother replies, "I can't even imagine what I would do at my age." This is a self-deception technique known as inconceivability. which happens when we declare a proposition to be false or impossible simply because we cannot conceive it actualized. We all do this, but knowing that we're doing it is more than half the battle. 16 months ago, I began the process of looking around for examples of propaganda or manipulation on the internet. The only place I found that has made an attempt to collect examples is logicallyfallacious.com. It is an excellent site and a great place to go learn the definitions of various techniques. However, there is only one example of each technique. There was certainly not enough to begin a database. They are also very academic in their efforts to list some 300 different techniques. But for an enjoyable and engaging game, 300 techniques might be a bit much. I didn't want players that came to our site to feel as though they were at a university learning the subtle nuances of manipulation. I wanted players to see real-life examples and vote on the smallest possible number of techniques. This is why the original creators of the propaganda game chose 55 techniques and placed them into 6 sections. This is a manageable and playable amount. Logicallyfallacious.com is a great place to go study propaganda, but I was looking for something else, which is a place where visitors can share observations and even life experiences where dishonesty and manipulation has occurred. During this last year, while creating the online version of the propaganda game, I have been watching alternative news outlets and reading the comments section of uploaded videos as well as various message boards and chat services. What I have found is a growing discontention and distrust of politicians, media figures, and quite frankly, many in positions of power. The propaganda game was recently presented on the Jimmy Dore Show as a result of reaching out to the show's panel members. As I watch shows like the Jimmy Dore Show, Secular Talk, Redacted Tonight, and others, I noticed something very interesting. Many of these shows play clips of politicians and pundits, and afterwards discuss what was said in the video. Occasionally, these alternative news outlets will point out a red herring or a diversion tactic or a leading question. But for the most part, many of them scratch their heads and say, "Isn't that weird?" or "That doesn't sound right," while playing a clip from a politician or pundit. All the while, many times, I'm at home talking to my monitor saying, "Yep, that is weird. It's also begging the question," or academic detachment, or sophistical formula. I've very much wanted to contact as many of these alternative news outlets as I can, just to tell them that when you know and can identify the specific propaganda technique that's being used, it is extremely empowering. If the public were armed with this knowledge, those who make it their goal in life to fool others for their own benefit would cease to get away with what they get away with. There is a motto that I keep near me at all times when talking to people about the propaganda game, which is that it is one thing to know that you're being lied to, it is another to know how you're being lied to. If you catch someone lying to you or misleading you, there's a good chance that that person will never lie to you again. They've already been caught. But if you don't learn how they got away with lying to you in the first place, there's a good chance that you could get lied to by someone else in that same way. The propaganda game teaches us what to look for, the forms of deception, the maneuvering of manipulation, the language of lies. Generally, when people hear the word propaganda, they think of politics or the media. If you Google the word propaganda, the images area shows nothing but old Russian propaganda posters. Generally, the term is used to indicate a method used to promote or publicize a particular political cause or point of view. But most of the time when the word is used, it is not followed by the particular propaganda technique that was used. Without that, in my opinion, it's an abstract term or a blanketed concept. If I tell you that John Kerry just used propaganda to the press regarding his meeting with UN ambassadors, I've told you that he may have misled them, but I haven't told you how. It would be very much like if I were to tell you that I watched your house get broken into while you were away, but I've neglected to tell you who it was that broke in, even though I saw who it was. Without the particulars, all I've done is told you that something bad has happened. For me, and I suspect for many people, we know that someone has broken into our house, but we aren't exactly sure who it was or how they did it. To give this analogy more of a foundation, I'll give you a really good example of how propaganda plays out in everyday life. A very popular propaganda technique that is used frequently by progressives is the term gaslighting. The term is being borrowed from a 1944 crime film about a husband who tries and succeeds to convince his wife that she's crazy. Anti-establishment progressives certainly feel as though this technique is being done to them by the status quo on a daily basis, but this only scratches the surface of how often it gets used. How many times have we had an uncanny realization about something only to be told, "You're crazy," or some form of undermining or minimization follows? This happens with bosses, with spouses, with friends, with our neighbors, and it certainly isn't confined to political discourse or media exploitation. All my life I've watched people get what they want by manipulating others, either by flattery, by sympathy, by trickery, or by many other forms of deception. With those who are very skilled in the art of deception, multiple forms of propaganda are used in a composition of techniques. Those good at diversion, for instance, will pretend to be on the same page with you before they slowly take you off course to the point where your original concern is left unresolved, or worse, you accept the diversion as more pertinent and forget your point altogether. Today, I walk down the aisles in grocery stores and I listen very carefully to what's going on in my head. As I walk past the breakfast cereals, for example, there is a cacophony of jingles going off in my head. Cinnamon Toast Crunch, the cartoon bakers that dance on the kitchen table in the one commercial. Tony the Tiger growling, "They're great." Life cereal, "He won't eat it. He hates everything. He likes it. Hey, Mikey." The commercial with the little boy named Mikey that eats Life cereal. Toucan Sam telling me to follow his nose. Then the Cocoa Puffs commercial. Then the Lucky Charms commercial. I don't think I even noticed the music and images and memories of advertisements branded in my head. It was always an unconscious process going on in the background of my mind. But now it's at the forefront. At some point I began to wonder if my own voice was in there somewhere amongst all the animations going on. And that's just one aisle. And that's just one part of my life. If this type of programming occurs generally without question, I can't help but to wonder in what other ways are we being led or misled. Commercials always fascinated me, even when I was young. The difference between now and years ago is that the veil has been lifted as a result of understanding the propaganda techniques being used. I don't want to pitch a wholesale condemnation of every company who advertises, but I don't think it's much of a stretch to suggest that a company who is selling shampoo really doesn't care about my ability to attract women, although women are flocking to the man who just used their product in the commercial. Chances are high they're trying to make money and wanting their name and brand branded in my mind. The many forms of these constant attempts at persuasion are irrelevant to the actual substance of the product being sold or the idea being espoused. The many forms of these constant attempts at persuasion are irrelevant to the actual substance of the product being sold or the idea being espoused. The irrelevant section in the propaganda game houses techniques such as appearance, which is that the appearance of a thing is made the basis of our acceptance or rejection without any thought that this appearance may be a deceptive indicator of value. Repetition is another technique found in the irrelevant section, which is used to constantly bombard us with ideas or logos or campaign rhetoric. If we continue to hear the same thing over and over again, the truth of it becomes secondary. Familiarity in this case breeds acceptance. The delivery method of anyone with an agenda can use degrees and titles, important sounding technical jargon, celebrity status, catchy slogans, big numbers that astound, or proverbial quotes said by wise men to lure us in. We invite anyone to play the propaganda game. However, I must say that those who come to our site, stay, and become authors have a certain intellectual curiosity that you don't find with just anyone. Those interested in deceptive designs are generally that one person at a magic show that stands up and says, I know how you did that. Others who gravitate to the propaganda game are those of us who have been lied to or taken advantage of, whether things that have been said to us in dysfunctional homes, medical professionals who don't listen and instead use diversion to get us to leave their office before we've been able to tell them everything we need to, or sociological norms constantly appealing to our insecurities. Many of us who have had some difficulty in life and or have been taken advantage of to whatever degree generally end up in either two categories: victimhood or self-sufficiency. Victimhood is a common result of victimization, and the definition of victimization is to dupe, swindle, or cheat. So it's not that those who continue to stay stuck in whatever trap they're in haven't been a victim, because we all have at some point in our lives. But at some point we do have a choice to continue to fall for the same traps over and over. Eventually, many even become comfortable in this self-martyrdom of victimhood. Blame becomes a useful tool in not taking responsibility, but the ingredients, the components that make up that victimhood, are never fully resolved. These components are simply no more than information we were given that is simply faulty when looked at objectively. These components are nothing more than information that we were given by someone else and or we continue to tell ourselves. Information that should be questioned. This is the very definition of propaganda. This is the very purpose of understanding propaganda techniques. The reason why we should question faulty reasoning in ourselves and others is because it keeps us in loops. It keeps us in old stories that play out sometimes even for lifetimes. Loops that keep us from growing. Many suggest that we shouldn't blame others for our problems or stop being a victim. This is good advice, but unfortunately what can also go into this suggestion is to not have any protestations at all. Even questioning can sometimes land one into some sort of marginalization, particularly when we question our leaders. But this isn't good either. We can question and point out fallacies without being cynics or without playing the blame game. What tools like the propaganda game suggest is that there most definitely are manipulators in the world, but you can see through the veil they hide behind, which reduces their effectiveness. Once light is shed on this darkness, the power that the manipulator possesses diminishes and they no longer take the form of an enemy we blame for our problems. A certain empowerment comes into play that was not there before. And for many of us, a healthy assertive reaction follows that was not there when we were content with only blaming. But there is an unfortunate impediment to discovering the handiwork of a manipulator, and that is simply that they are very crafty, very covert. The problem goes even deeper, which is that some don't even know that they're doing it consciously. This is obvious in the use of some of the propaganda techniques that the propaganda game teaches, such as appeal to flattery, which is an attempt to persuade someone by flattering them on their appearance or some area in which they excel. For some, this technique is done for their very survival, or at least they think they need to. The technique of disproving a minor point is found done even by children and stays with them even into adulthood because they found it to be an effective way to discredit and thus stand above another in the eyes of their peers. These techniques and others become so ingrained that the users of them really don't even know that they're doing them. It becomes normalized, simply a default way to deal with the world. The techniques of rationalization, wishful thinking, and drawing the line are even better examples. There was a question recently posted on the Propaganda Facebook page that asked the question, I understand that people are using these methods of deception, but I want to be able to counter their argument and stop them in their tracks. How do I do that? This is a great question. It's not always possible to confront manipulation, especially with those in power. When it occurs in everyday life with coworkers, with family members, with people we see regularly, we may have to practice diligence, unless of course the manipulation is a daily occurrence and a stand must be taken. Every situation is different, and we don't necessarily recommend that when we see these techniques occur that we point them out constantly. An outright war on everyone who uses propaganda techniques on others might draw extreme reactions. But what is of utmost importance is that if it is not possible to point manipulation techniques out to the users of them, we need to understand that we already have won the battle by recognizing the techniques themselves. Tools like the propaganda game aren't just about going after the victimizer, but moreover they teach how not to be a victim, which in essence takes power away from the propagandist. Most manipulators simply will not accept another telling them that they are practicing deception, or they already know they are and are living just fine with themselves. Pointing it out whenever possible plants seeds and tells the perpetrator that we know what they're doing, but don't expect change. The very fact that a propagandist met someone who can see through their trickery tells them we're out there. So don't think you're going to be able to get away with what you're getting away with everyone. And occasionally we might even confront someone who was simply unaware that they were using faulty reasoning or being deceptive and thank us for pointing it out. It's uncommon, but it does happen. The point to all this is that understanding propaganda techniques and recognizing them when they occur should first and foremost be for our own growth, and not to assume that we're going to help someone else grow by pointing out their fallacies. This is not to say that we shouldn't point them out in others. Quite the contrary, but be wise about it. And remember, by removing your own faulty reasoning, by removing your own internal manipulations, by being impervious to techniques used by others, others will see this and gravitate towards this type of thinking. We all want to change the system. We all want to rid the world of deception and exploitation, but we must first and foremost have our own ducks in a row. Because the parasitic practicers of propaganda will use our own susceptibilities against us. This video could easily become 3 hours of examples and talk as to why tools like the propaganda game are important. It's not only a matter of importance, it is a service and skill that is missing entirely from political discourse and other areas of life we concern ourselves with. Even the alternative news outlets that rail against mainstream media need to start calling out those using the manipulation methods found in the propaganda game. And not just calling them out, calling out the exact techniques they are employing so that others can identify them. It's already begun. Very popular outlets like The Jimmy Dore Show and Redacted Tonight are replaying segments and analyzing them. Of course, they're taking heat for it constantly, but as long as they don't stop, others will begin to do the same. Because people are seeing through the pretenses and faulty reasoning. What tools like the propaganda game do is hand those interested a magnifying glass. We're not going to tell you what the truth is. We want to give you a microscope and say, see for yourself. A very common phrase that I hear a lot from progressives is speaking truth to power, which I'm all for. But it is not enough to say that politicians are corrupt or that we're being manipulated by the media. More people than you might think either suspect or already know this. But when we point out exactly how the manipulation happens, it removes the suspicion entirely. At that point, there is no denying it. It's bad enough that we have to guard against these techniques in everyday life with associations, but when people with real power are using them, and using them successfully, we need a different species of education altogether. When we first begin to learn the techniques, we see them sporadically here and there. Eventually, we see them everywhere. We even have to watch ourselves that we're not seeing them when they're really not there, which is why the game brings into play the no technique as a possible vote on examples. This is to keep us grounded and remember that there really are good people in the world who aren't trying to deceive us. As a result of more and more people understanding and being able to recognize propaganda techniques, our hope is that visitors to our site will become authors and submit examples they have discovered in their lives or by those in power. Currently, our database consists of examples created by teachers all over the country for students. They are more than adequate for teaching visitors to our site the various propaganda techniques, but they are safe and some may even say too soft. But we want more hard-hitting examples. We don't shy away from any issues, so feel free to begin submitting images, videos, or text examples where propaganda occurs. Our company consists of only 2 people, and it is not possible to increase the size and quality of the database by ourselves. At present, there are over 3,000 examples to be viewed in the single-player game, but we want at least 50,000. As a result of these new examples that you will bring to us, our database will improve not only in size but in quality. It's not a matter of being able to find propaganda examples. It becomes a matter of trying to find examples where propaganda doesn't occur. They're everywhere. Thank you for watching. We can easily be reached at info@propagandagame.org or follow us on Twitter or Facebook using the links below.